Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Jennifer, do you want to kick us off?
Audio working here. Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today for our local 2020 Women on Boards event. My name is Jennifer Hunter, and I'm here with Jessica Bell Vanderwall, and we're the co-chairs for 2020 Women on Boards in the Carolinas. Now, before we jump in here today, we recognize that many of you may not be familiar with 2020 Women on Boards and our events. So I'll give you a little bit of background. So 2020 Women on Boards is a 501c3 organization focused on education, training, and advocacy with the mission of supporting greater gender balance and diversity on boards. More specifically, for the last 10 years, 2020 Women on Boards has been focused on achieving the goal of getting 20% of all board seats to be filled by women by 2020. One key element of this work is digging into the data and understanding the gender mix per board and working with companies to achieve this goal. This led us to create the first gender diversity index, which you can find on the 2020 Women on Boards website. You can search any Russell 3000 company and see where they fall on the diversity index. Originally, we focused on the Fortune 1000, but then shifted to the Russell 3000 in 2017 when we realized that while larger companies were progressing, a lot of smaller companies were not. That said, we are proud to say that after expanding our focus to include the entire Russell 3000, we were still able to achieve the goal of 20% by 2020. So thank you and congratulations to so many of you that helped us get there. Today, 22.6% of all board seats are held by women. And a key aspect of our work and the progress that we're trying to continue on with is bringing leaders like you together at a local level to discuss how we continue to make this progress. Last year, we hosted our annual event at the Beckler Museum and heard from local public company board members like Kathy Passant from B of A, Jean Lowe from SPX Corp., Karen Norwald from Albemarle Corporation. This year, we have the pleasure of talking with Mary Winston, Tom Fink, Lenny Hainsworth, Dorlisa Fleur, and Ruth Shaw about their journey to and inside the boardroom.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. It's wonderful to be with all of you today. Now, as all of you know, 2020 has been a bit of a different year. However, that gave us at 2020 Women on Boards an opportunity to do things differently too, which was not only to go virtual like we're at today, but also to have a conversation at the global level and then across cities at the local level. 28 local communities across the globe will have their events over the next few weeks. So there's still time to register for more city level events as desired on our website. And I hope that many of you were able to join our global event last week. We had some fantastic speakers, including Melinda Gates, Brian Moynihan, and more. And with your registration at today's event, you have access to this event too. So if you missed it, let us know and we can make sure you find the recording. Now at our event today, we will double click the local level. In particular, we will review the gender diversity statistics for both North and South Carolina today and over the past few years. Then we will switch gears to allow our panelists, who are all very connected, well-established leaders and board members within the Southeast, to add their perspective on this discussion. We've also incorporated some of the questions that you submitted in advance of the session as well. And then finally, we'll close with one of the cornerstone elements of our programming, our breakout sessions led by one experienced corporate director and our panelists. Hopefully all of you filled out the survey link in advance to specify which breakout type you want to be in, but if not, we actually have a very special guest, our co-founder and chair of 2020 Women on Board, Stephanie Sonnabend, who will do an overall coaching session with those of you remaining and take live Q&A in the chat. During these sessions, you'll hear from an experienced corporate director who will share their personal experience, provide some very relevant tips and information based on where you are in your journey, and facilitate some introductions and networking. And I'll say this last piece is incredibly unique and powerful, and it's where my journey with 2020 Women on Board started just 5 years ago in San Francisco during a roundtable discussion. So I hope you'll join us for this part of the discussion.
I agree, Jessica. I have to say I was a bit concerned this year about our keynote event being virtual. And I was worried because the networking was so invaluable to me personally last year at the event. And I'm so pleased that we're able to stand up this small group coaching and networking this year. So hopefully everybody can stay on for the last 20 to 30 minutes of this program to be able to get that benefit. Also want to make sure that we take a few minutes to say a big thank you to our sponsors. We have an absolutely fantastic group of local sponsors this year, as you can see, as well as global sponsors that have not only contributed to our event today, but across many other cities nationally. All of these companies and the executive sponsors of each of these companies are true leaders in this journey to drive gender balance and diversity in the boardroom. And we're very grateful for their support.
Yes, thank you again to our sponsors. Okay, so as we mentioned, before we jump into the panel, let's look at what % of board members are women, especially in the Carolinas. So as you can see on this graph, we're showing you the data starting in 2017, because as Jennifer mentioned, we switched to look more broadly at the Russell 3000 around that time frame. So regionally, here's what we're seeing over the past few years. So you'll first and foremost see the Russell 3000 lines. So that has steadily increased over the past 4 years, going from 16% in 2017 to 22.6%. And the great thing is the percentage of women headquartered at companies in North Carolina has also increased from 15% to 22.5% for a total of 133 women on boards in North Carolina. Now, comparatively, South Carolina, we've gone from 13% to 20.3%. You can see a pretty substantial jump after 2018 in particular, and that totals around 26 women on boards in the South Carolina region. So across North and South Carolina, that means we've achieved 20% in both states, which is fantastic, for a total of over 150 women on boards in the Carolinas, some of which are on our panel and on the phone today. Now you might be asking, though, how are we doing at a company level? Well, we have deemed companies with boards that have over 20% women. So again, if you look at their board member composition, they have more than 20% are women. We've deemed them W companies or winning companies. And what you see here is that although the number of companies headquartered in North and South Carolina is different, obviously, the percentages are actually pretty similar. So in North Carolina, there's 64 companies headquartered here, and 38 or 59% are W companies. And similarly, in South Carolina, there are 14 companies and 8 are W companies. And again, this data is actually reflective of the past 3 years as we're still gathering some of the data for 2020. So what does this mean for all of you? It means there's still a need. In fact, for both states to get to 20%, we need 29 to 39 more women in North Carolina, and we need 8 to 10 more women in South Carolina. So a total of 37 to 49 women across both states, which will hopefully be filled by some of the fantastic women at our discussion today.
Now, you may have scratched your head a few times. Well, wait a minute, it's called 2020 Women on Boards, and it's 2020 now. So what's next? Are we done? Well, I have to, I'm excited to roll out that not hardly. We're not done, and we're refocusing and we're rebranding to 50-50 women on boards next year. So we really are going to strive to achieve full parity, equal representation of women and men on board. So we're really excited about this goal, and we hope you are too.
Fantastic. And 2020 Women on Boards is continuing to put forward educational content and training to support this bold goal. In particular, we will be continuing our very popular hands-on Get on Board workshops. And I know many of you have already attended those and seen great results as you put together your board bios. And additionally, we're taking it one step further with an in-depth program called Path to the Boardroom, which double clicks on relevant topics and training for senior level women interested in taking their board leadership to the next level. And of course, we will continue to host events like today to support you in building out your networks. And I'll just say finally, if you're interested in supporting 2020 Women on Boards more directly, and or you want to work with me and Jennifer and our leadership committee at a local level, feel free to email us at charlotte@2020womenonboards.com.
Okay, so now for our main event, our VIP panel. As we mentioned before, once the panel's over, we're going to go through as much Q&A as you submitted in advance as we have time for, and we'll make some brief closing remarks and then switch to our breakouts around kind of 12:30, 12:40 time frame. And those will go until about 1 o'clock. Or if your specific breakout session attendees are flexible and want to stay longer, we certainly welcome that as well. And then the event will actually conclude in the breakout. So I'm pleased to introduce our esteemed moderator, Mrs. Mary Winston today. Mary is a Charlotte resident and the former CFO of Family Dollar. She's also served as a CFO for 2 other very large industry-leading corporations. It's frankly nearly impossible to find anyone who has the public company board experience that Mary has. She has served in every role from chair of the audit committees to chair of the compensation committees to serving on transformation committee and the governance committee. She's on the board currently of $11 billion Bed Bath & Beyond, and also served as the CEO during a significant transition period for the company. She's also on the board of $6 billion restaurant chain Chipotle, is on the board of a $4 billion lighting manufacturer, Acuity Brands. She's on the board of a $5 billion pulp and paper manufacturer, Domtar, is on the board of an $8 billion diversified industrial manufacturer, Dover. And in addition, Mary gives a lot of her time to the national community, to our local community, and serves as the president at NACD in the Carolinas. So Mary, thank you so much for your time today. I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm so happy to be here today, and I'm certainly joined by an impressive panel. And so we'll start with each of the panelists just doing a brief introduction. I know the audience has seen their bios, but I'd love to hear in their own words how they would introduce themselves briefly. Ruth, let's start with you. You.
Thank you, Mary. Now that I'm unmuted, I still am Ruth Shaw, and I am the former CEO of Duke Power Company, served in a number of other roles there, started my career as an educator, and have lengthy board experience on companies both large and small.
Dorlisa, how about you?
Thank you, Mary. And I will say it's such an honor to follow both you and Ruth, both of whom have inspired me and also advised me in my journey. So I'm glad to be able to be part of passing it along. So I am a corporate board director and senior advisor. I currently serve on 2 public retail boards and on 1 player in the cold storage food chain that's owned by a British conglomerate. I also advise a grocer that's in the process of going public. And before I moved into this stage, I will say board service is kind of an amalgamation of my first life as a McKinsey consultant, and then my second one, getting real jobs in the retail sector.
Thanks, Dorlisa. Lenny? Oh, Lenny, I think you're muted as well.
Thank you. I'm Lenny Hainsworth. I started my career in board service following many years as an aerospace and defense and intelligence leader at Northrop Grumman Corporation. And I always say I joined that corporation as a teenager, so just sharing. I serve on the Truist Financial Corporation board and happen to serve also on their tech committee, which I think we may talk about a little later, as well as I'm a new member to the ADP board.
Great. And Tom, last but not least.
Thank you, Mary. Well, it's a true honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation and just appreciate being invited. Well, as of 2 weeks ago, I was the chairman and CEO of Barings. I will be retiring at the end of the month. In part to go on the board of Invesco, which will be really my first public board engagement outside of my activities that were within Barings. But certainly I've been on a lot of boards in our activities as an investment firm, and just look forward to the discussion.
Great, great. Well, thanks again to all of you for joining me. So why don't we start our conversation with just asking you to reflect back on your own journey to the boardroom. So what were the steps that you guys took to land your first boards? What advice would you have people who are just beginning that journey? Ruth, I'll start with you.
Well, my journey is unusual in that I was in an educational role when I moved into my first board position. I was president of Central Piedmont Community College. And my first I was invited to serve on the advisory board of Nations Bank and served in that role about a year. And then out of the blue came an invitation to join the corporate board of First Union. That I wouldn't say I was on a journey, Mary, because I was not seeking corporate board roles in any particular way. I didn't know very much about them, never worked in a corporation. But I believe what got me there was high profile civic activities and being in a CEO role at a large institution, which, although the for-profit role is quite different, nonetheless had some parlance in the corporate world.
That makes sense. Lenny, how about you? Why don't you tell us about your journey?
Sure, mine was a little less, I'll say, straightforward. While I was working, I did not think about joining public boards for quite some time, but I served on non-public boards and alliances. I served on our local Northern Virginia Technology Council, or also the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority trustees. And so I got a little experience in audit and other roles on boards. And I started thinking then about public board service. So I would say I started to learn to make a decision about being on a board, to understand the work scope. Then I started to learn how to prepare. So I took classes and tried to understand what board work really was like, to spend time with other board directors and understand my real commitment for the future. And then I started to learn how to communicate my business experience to a value proposition for boards. How did that translate into something that was important for public boards? And then I would say, finally, I partnered and took action to let people know that I wanted to be on boards and share with my network my intention. And I treated every one of the contacts with potential boards like I would treat a critical customer relationship. I prepared for those discussions. I held them in high regard in terms of utilizing other people's time. So everyone, whether it resulted in a board assignment or not, was important to me in terms of the engagement and relationship development with people who could potentially recommend me for future boards. So I took it seriously. So that's the road that I took. And I'll say finally that my first board came from some of that networking. People who knew I was interested, who knew I had been preparing, recommended me for board work.
That's great. So let me just ask about the type of experiences that you all think are really suited to today's boardroom in terms of adding value. You know, our national theme today is women directors during times of crisis. And so my question is, how does leading an organization through a crisis or even just significant business change prepare someone for board service? What types of crisis experience might women bring that you would consider valuable in the boardroom? Dorlisa, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Mary. I would say the threshold level of experience that I've found that's been helpful in the boardroom is just having been a senior executive with a fairly lengthy career. And, for those of you, I know we all put a lot of time, Lenny mentioned it, into preparing our value propositions. I will say I found in all of my first discussions with boards, they all wanted my executive CV because that was what showed them that I had been successful driving results in multiple contexts over a long period of time. And so you knew the bumps and ups and downs. I'd say specifically within this kind of crisis period, like a lot of things, COVID has really accelerated this move of the board going from being an independent oversight to needing to be engaged and adding value, sometimes in the trenches. I mean, many of us went from meeting quarterly to weekly or biweekly. For me specifically, I'm on 2 retail boards that were 2 retailers that were in a stage of digital transformation. And COVID rapidly sped this up because they were both deemed non-essential and all their stores were shut down for the better part of April and a little longer. And so my bringing that digital transformation experience to them was what they needed. I could help point out some landmines. I could also help them keep a little bit longer range view when they were kind of living day to day. But I will say, having lived through this last 6 months as a board member, what it's really reaffirmed is that diversity of thought that's needed, because really having a whole group of board members who could swarm all the issues. I wasn't going to swarm liquidity, but people who could swarm, as I did, digital, people, liquidity, et cetera.
Great, thank you. Tom, how about you?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. When I first became CEO of Babson Capital, the predecessor Barings, it was during the financial crisis. And I agree with what Dorlisa was saying, that in that time of crisis, your engagement with the board is critical. So as the new CIO of MassMutual and the new head of Babson at the time during a financial crisis, there were several board members I relied on significantly during that time, including one of them was a former, president, Kathleen Corbett, former president of S&P, because their experience, Kathleen's experience at S&P, running S&P, was really valuable to me, overseeing, at the time was probably $150 billion investment portfolio. And so, I do think that collaboration is very important because of the shared experience of leading during a crisis as a management team. And I think it's always better if the relationships between the board member and the management teams and the different members, not just the CEO, can be built over time so that familiarity is there before the crisis happens, right? Because I think if you can build those relationships early, then it's an easier conversation and one that's built on trust that has been earned. And let's face it, as a management team, you're going to worry about the situation you're managing, as you should. And as a board member, you want that management team to trust you. So I think building it up over time makes a difference too, before the crisis.
That's great, thank you. So related to that, I'm going to ask several of you a question about building those trusted relationships and how you go about doing that. And, some executives use nonprofit board service for that, or other professional associations. And I think, Lenny, you mentioned a couple of things. And so my broad question is just, what are the strategies for building those trusted relationships, building your visibility, building your strategic business contacts that could then eventually lead to board service? Lenny, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. I would offer that some of the paths, and there are many, could include things like becoming an advisory support to a board, providing your experience and depth of understanding around specific areas of your career to topics that are critical to boards. And many times boards seek advisory committee support to address a challenge. So that's one way to establish a strong relationship with particular board members. Other areas of opportunity include joining organizations that are focused on board development. Women on Boards is a fine example, where folks get together who have a common interest of promoting women for boards and creating those networks, because as the women in those networks get on boards, they can also reference and refer you to other members, because as Dorlisa and I have talked about, at some point we get to a place where we have enough board work already, but the calls continue to come, and we can serve as a mechanism to introduce members of the boards that are seeking new members to people we know. And so that's a leverage point as well. And then finally, I would say this notion of creating alliances and really reaching out to help people in their business areas, especially if you're currently working, to let people know that you're willing to take on extra work to support activities that might be visible to your own boards, to support your company's interaction with their board so that you can see what that dynamic looks like. And you can also create relationships with members of your own board of directors.
That's great. Dorlisa, do you have anything to add? I know you've done quite a bit of advisory work with boards and things. Anything you want to add on this one?
You know, Mary, I think I would emphasize that this is not a get rich quick scheme. It's really the cumulative set of lifetime experience and relationships that you have that make a difference, because you don't build trust overnight. And, you know, I'm always amazed when you talk to many people, you'll find that the relationship is with someone in the boardroom. It doesn't start with the whole board. It starts with a person, maybe on the C-suite. And that those ties often go back to times that you didn't even know you were auditioning for being a board member, because they saw you in a job at your company. They dealt with you in a customer supplier relationship. They served with you on a nonprofit board, or even, you know, saw you with your kids at school. So, you know, bring your A game to everything you do. And that's the kind of thing that builds the relationships that people then feel comfortable pulling you into the boardroom with them.
Such good advice. And, you know, I think we all know that landing a board seat is unlike any other, you know, search, for lack of a better word. You know, you don't apply for a corporate board position. It's not posted publicly and publicly announced. It's a relatively closely held process that's managed by the current board. So the process of being on that radar can be unique. And so I guess I asked the general question, and maybe we've touched on most of it. I'm going to ask you, Ruth, outside of the traditional networking opportunities, what are some of the other things that you can think of and suggest to our audience that are ways to just be on that radar when the time comes?
I think we have hit most of the ways to be on the radar through raising your visibility in industry groups, in leading civic groups. I do think that becomes a powerful way to raise your profile. But in addition to that, most, if not many boards still have retirement policies. Having an understanding, once you sort of targeted some areas where your expertise would be in high demand, you can take a look at what vacancies are likely to be occurring. Where does it make sense for you to try to cultivate some connections if you can, and looking at the entire board for members where you might have a second degree relationship, or where you might be in the same industry and connect at an event, is a good way to begin to lay the groundwork for consideration. Because every board I'm on starts every search by asking current board members for any suggestions of who might fill that role effectively. And no matter what search firm they go with, no matter what, that is where they start. So understand where your opportunities are. Be strategic about it. They're not everywhere. And if you don't see the opportunity for a vacancy for 6 years or something on a board, put your energy someplace else.
Absolutely. Good advice. Tom, anything you'd like to add?
You know, those were a lot of things covered. And I go back to, I think, what Lenny said earlier. You start this process before you even know you started. At the end of the day, in business, you need to build a network. And I've always found there's transactional people, and that's it. They do the transaction, they move on. And then there's people that in the process of the transaction, they build a relationship. And I think a lot of the opportunities come through those relationships that take time. You know, relationships take time. You have to make the effort to say, you know what, I'm going to check in with so-and-so because I really enjoyed working with them and I just want to keep up with them. And it almost has to occur as a part of the body of work in your career. And I think those, frankly, the opportunities I'm seeing are mostly, a result of the fact that I've had relationships with people over a long period of time. So I do think, just in managing your own career, think about who you want to have an ongoing relationship with. And it may or may not result in boards, but in the least, you're making a friend through business.
Absolutely. That's very good advice. So when we think about the skills that are needed on a board based on the typical structure. I think everyone knows that the traditional committees on a board are audit, compensation, nominating, and governance. Just about every public company has those three committees. But depending on the industry, the company's circumstances, there are sometimes additional committees that are focused on specific areas of the company, specific risks, specific industry norms. What's the importance of those unique skill sets that don't fall into those, traditional buckets as people are looking to add somebody to their board? So things like experience in ESG functions, cybersecurity, digital marketing, technology, human capital management, all very current priorities for boards today. Some of them are adding committees around those, some of them not. But what's the importance of having that in your background? And as you guys start to, think about people who are coming on your boards, how important are those unique skill sets? And does that win the day, so to speak, in terms of somebody being added to a board these days? I'm going to start with Lenny. I'll start with you. You mentioned earlier about a couple of experiences that are related to this question.
Well, let's see, I would certainly say that particularly with COVID experiences across the globe, security for companies is top of mind. And security for all assets, data security, as well as the infrastructure for companies. And so prior to COVID, there was a lot of discussion around how to get that expertise into the discussions in the board. Some companies have sought that as part of their board membership. Others have sought it and stood up committees that are focused specifically on that, either augmenting audit and risk if they have a separate risk committee, or in the case of the board I'm on, a separate technology committee where cyber related, security related issues are covered. But I would say, just like with ESG and the other topics, special topics you mentioned, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to get a minimum level of understanding of those issues so that we as a full board can participate in understanding the strategy and can participate in asking the challenging questions around a broad set of topics, including these emerging ones. And so I think it's important for us to spend time understanding what the environment is around a variety of topics, including the area of expertise we bring to the table, whatever that is.
Great. Ruth, what about you? What do you think?
Well, my experience, and I currently chair 3 governance committees. I'm proud to say that every board I'm on or have recently been on has 3 or 4 women members on its board, as well as solid records and diversity. That's been a mission for me. Typically, the boards on which I serve are looking more for breadth, leadership, perspective, vision, judgment. Several of them are wary of using board seats to get too narrow in any particular expertise. That's really not what we're looking for. And we will typically bring in advisors to get, well, I'll give a good example, which is unique to my specific industry, electric utilities. Any utility with nuclear facilities has a nuclear oversight committee. But do you want to use a board seat on a nuclear expert when in fact it takes a lot to be deep in nuclear, but the judgment calls that you make regarding it are not unique to nuclear. So we use very strong advisors as opposed to having a nuclear expert. So I would say it matters, but the advice, Lenny, that you and Mary have both offered of develop that breadth of vision, be familiar with the terms, understand the significance, but it is that body of work and that demonstrated delivery of results over a broad set of accountabilities that will make the biggest difference.
Great, thank you. Dorlisa, anything for you to add?
I would totally echo what Ruth said about you don't want to look like you're trying to be hired to do something. That is something we would hire an outside advisor for. Often use the analogy of being more T-shaped, that you really are looking for breadth, but it is good to have some areas of expertise. And in the boards that I'm in, I'm finding they're using committees and task forces, because what is happening in the current world is there are new issues coming up that many who've been around the table, even for 15 years, haven't dealt with before. Couple of days ago, I had a 2-day board meeting and I got added to the Nominating Governance Committee because we need to have a focus on ESG. I'm not an expert on that, but I'm pretty intellectually curious. And so I had been driving things. And so they kind of said, hey, you be the subcommittee. There's some other cases I've been in. 2 of my boards in the middle of the pandemic decided we needed to have the board engage with management on midterm strategy. And so we stood up task forces, which one in particular was one of the most amazing things we did, because we met with the management team biweekly and it let us be very adaptive as we went. So I'd say bring your unique skills, but look around you. There's a lot of things that no one has the full answer. So be the one that's being curious and pursuing that so you can go help bring that problem solving approach.
Great. So as you guys reflect on people coming on boards, and especially you, Ruth, since you head NOM and Gov committees, what's the number one thing that you recommend that a woman not do in her pursuit of getting on a board, or not say when they do get that interview and are seriously being considered? What do you recommend that they not do?
Boy, a fellow worked for me for a long time who used to always say you can't think of all the things to tell them not to do. And I would simply echo that. There are so many ways to put your foot in your proverbial mouth, and it often depends on the circumstance. But the main thing is what everybody in this audience probably already knows about interviewing. Just don't blow your own horn that hard. It's one thing to refer to your record, but you don't have to just, fall over backwards, patting yourself on the back. And I think that's a mistake. Not only women, men make it too. But that's the mistake I'd advise against most, because board members are typically confident people, self-assured people, and they don't really have to flatter themselves for their accomplishments to be recognized.
Thank you. So Tom, I'm going to focus on you just for a moment. I mean, you're obviously a clear advocate for gender diversity as represented by your presence here today. And so thank you for your leadership in that area. How do you as a man persuade other male CEOs and board members to see the value that women can bring to the corporate boardroom? In other words, how are you a positive ally for getting more women on boards, and how do you encourage your male colleagues to do the same?
I think, we're moving beyond, though not totally, the moment of you have to convince the CEO this is good, to you have to really find ways to just like this forum, really bring together the companies and successful women professionals that matter, and maybe tie into a little bit of what we just talked about. What boards need is obviously diversity of gender, diversity in other ways through race, etc. But you also need that diversity of perspectives. And we talked a bit about just now your own experience and what you're bringing into a company. Maybe it's a financial industry company and you're bringing, technology experience to the table. But I also think there's a generational experience here too. And one of the things I might say to some of the CEOs is, let's also broaden that to consider, maybe getting younger, females and professionals into the board opportunities sooner. Because, I have 5 children. I have 2 daughters. My oldest daughter's 26. She's getting her MBA. She worked at Bain Consulting. Well, I have very interesting conversations with her just because her perspective is so different. And it's being a consultant, she's gotten a level of experience that I've found valuable in discussing the impact of the pandemic in our business. So, I just think thinking more dynamically is one thing I would say to CEOs in terms of not only the technical experience and diversity of the board, and certainly the gender and racial diversity, but also just different perspectives. Generational perspectives do matter, I think, today more than ever, especially when we're going through so much change.
Great, that's helpful. I'm going to ask the follow-on question to the other panelists. So you heard Tom's comments, and I guess I want to just ask you guys as women on boards, what does a strong ally look like to you? What are the additional things you'd hope for in terms of support for gender diversity on your boards? Are we approaching an easier time on that topic? As Tom mentioned, and I've seen it myself on my boards, but what does it look like to gain strong allies and to raise questions that on some boards are still difficult to talk about? So what does that allyship look like? I'm going to start with you, Lenny.
Let's see, I guess I would offer some of the things that I've experienced, which is that strong allyship is a multidimensional thing. So on the board, having people who welcome new members who happen to be women, who encourage offline, outside of the board meetings, the engagement and participation. I would say I always welcome a calibration session to better understand the process and the dynamic after new meetings where I've never been before. So that's something that can happen on the board, and any ally can do that, other women and men who happen to be seasoned board members. But I also think we can all serve as allies for each other and encourage other, in this case, men, to support women on boards through so many different dynamics, including actively engaging them on the topic. Sometimes it's a topic that people avoid, and I would offer just not doing that, to bring it forward, to talk about it openly, to have conversations about how progress can be made in these areas. And then finally, I would say, when we do that, show up with the list of candidates that can be considered. And organizations like this help us do that. And so we can't show up with the message that women should be added to boards empty-handed. We show up with that message that women should be added to boards, and here's a set of highly qualified women who could be considered for these roles. And when we engage with our peers and potential allies with that data, we can embolden folks to take action.
Great, sounds good. Well, so that we have some time to get to the audience questions, I want to wrap up our general discussion with a question that I'm going to point to all of you, and I'd just love to hear your thoughts. And that's just the broad-based question of, is there anything I didn't ask you, is there anything we haven't discussed that you think would be helpful to our audience in their journey to land a corporate board seat or excel as a director in the seats that they currently hold? And I'm just going to go in the order of the squares. I'll start with you, Ruth.
advice is always a tough thing to give, but I think continuing, everyone watching probably is already enjoying successes in her or even his career. But continue working on those successes, because I think the most important thing about gaining a board seat or doing well in one is working hard at the role that you're in, is doing your very best and demonstrating those kinds of results. I think women know that, and I think most men know that too. But that is fundamentally the most important thing. It's not the striving, the scratching, it's not even the networking and the cocktail parties. It's doing good work that indeed will be recognized as good work. And that's the single best advice I think I can give to any woman watching.
Perfect. Thanks. Dorlisa?
So I'd build on what Ruth says and say, if I put myself back in the shoes of trying to engage with your first board, be very purposeful in your networking. It's easy to fill up your calendar without advancing towards your goal. Showing my consultant roots, I literally kind of ran my search around a 2x2 matrix where my horizontal axis was how well they knew me and what value I could bring. And the vertical was how much they were, I'm going to use the pejorative term, in the deal flow. They knew about board seats that were coming open. And it was, easy to say, hey, there's that AA quadrant that's got the best of both. There are not enough contacts in there for most people. And so you do have to think, I use my little alphabet, and my lower right were the people who could be my brainstorm buddy. That was often my mentors who had retired and were no longer in the deal flow. There were people in the upper left that I needed to cultivate. They were in the deal flow. They didn't know me. So how did I connect purposefully? And then otherwise, there was a lot of time I could have spent in the D that was my de-emphasized. So that is unique to every person, but be very purposeful as you approach this networking process.
Great. Tom, what would your final advice be? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. I like what Lisa said. I mean, I think you do have to be purposeful. I think it's very easy, and I'm kind of going through this a little bit myself right now, as you're transitioning and maybe moving from one thing to another and career-wise. A lot of times there's going to be a lot of things that come in front of you, and you want to be selective. You want to be sure that the relationships matter, much like was just said, but also, is this the type of board you want to be a part of? And are you going to be excited to engage and give to that board, or is it going to be drudgery? Because you got to be motivated, just like you are with work, to do your best work for the company. And so I think being selective, and sometimes we're in a rush to kind of get from point A to point B, and we just need to be patient and make sure that's the good decision for the individual.
Great. And Lenny?
Well, so many great topics around onboarding and finding the right mix for an individual were already addressed by everybody on the board. I guess I would just offer that once that great first opportunity happens and you join a board, then really kick in to be a great addition to that team, which requires a lot of preparation, as well as, I'll say, probably modeling, sharing everything you know, to thinking through what's really valuable for the company. And in doing so, getting a great reputation such that that company and others will leverage you to add more women to their boards.
Great. All right. Well, we're going to move right into answering a few questions that our audience submitted before today. And so I'm just going to go through those. Anybody who wants to join in, please do. If I hear dead silence, I'll be forced to call on somebody. So our first question is, what is the one skill that you feel is absolutely needed to be successful serving on any corporate board? Anybody want to go first?
Sure. Listen. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to move from being, the CEO, and it's another skill set to come in the room and be supporting the CEO or supporting the management team. You got to listen.
Absolutely.
And
Anybody else?
learn to think like a shareholder. That's who you're representing. You're really not technically, I guess, supporting, you do support the CEO, but that's not your job, is to represent the shareholder. And, probably several of us have been in situations where what a current action was not necessarily in the best interest of shareholders. I don't know about you guys, but I've been in some pretty tough roles where things were going on that needed to change. So think like a shareholder. Be willing to speak out when you observe or even suspect things that are not on the up and up.
Okay, anybody else have anything else to add, or I'll go on to number 2?
Mary, I would add critical thinking. You get an 800-page board book, you've got to be really thoughtful about what matters.
And speak up, and don't accept an 800-page board book. They're awful, and you really need to assert the prerogative as a board to say, this is unacceptable. We cannot do good. And again, several boards I'm on, I don't take credit for this, but we've had individuals who really said, no, we cannot do this. You must distill this in a more effective way. And if you want to provide resource materials in our online list, please do. Those who have time for 800 pages can read it. But to be effective, we've got a 100-page limit for actual board content that's must read. And I'm not one of those one-page people. I know there have been plenty of them. But Dorlise is not kidding. You do get board books that are 800 pages long. And,
I know.
yeah, and I think it's important to draw a line on those. And again, I'm not saying don't have reference materials, but geez, it's too much.
We now all want to be on your boards, Ruth.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I haven't seen that 100-page board book yet.
I have.
That's a goal. And I think that forces management to think more strategically as well about what really needs to be presented to the board and in what level of detail, as opposed to just, doing a data dump.
A lot of managers and management teams, executives teams, really do not know how to present material to boards effectively. And it is a skill. Some executive teams do it marvelously well, and others could hardly be worse. So if your executive team doesn't have it, get after it.
Yeah, okay. Our second question is on diversity on boards. And so the author of this question says, I'm excited to see the trajectory of the percentage of women on corporate boards and how it will continue, and hope it will continue as we continue to support and help each other. However, I'm distressed about the low percentage of women of color on corporate boards. What are your thoughts about how we move this forward, and how do we establish a pipeline of diverse candidates who are board ready?
So I guess I would offer to start if that's all right. And for me, the question of people of color on boards comes with the purposeful intention to get there and to act on that intention. And so, if that is aligning board and board search efforts with organizations that track, train, and promote board-ready people of color. The Executive Leadership Council comes to mind. There are others that will help drive the connection between what I know are available board-ready people of color, to the needs for board membership. That's one mechanism to make that happen. But just as there has been an intentional focus on getting women on boards with results, not all the way that we want them yet, but with an outcome, I believe the same intention has to happen for people of color through the corporate structure, through the board, nom and gov teams, in partnership with organizations that have that same focus.
Thanks. Anybody else want to add to that?
I'd just say keep an eye on the in the companies where you are on a board, or the companies where you work, on the diversity in your own company. The pipeline gets filled by having people in roles that will lend themselves to service on corporate boards. So make sure you're following promotion, what's happening in diversity within the companies where you serve, because those people will be the pipeline of the future.
Perfect. Now, our final question I'm going to ask to everybody, and so just kind of rapid fire a little bit. As a member of a public company board, what do you worry about the most?
What I don't know.
Okay, that's a good one. Tom, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's you don't see the problem, so it's what you don't know, and just getting the right information so you can ask the questions to get there.
Lisa?
The culture, I think particularly when we've moved into this world of virtual, it makes those in-person interactions, sidebars, being able to even walk through DCs and stores that much more challenging. Into how you get the visibility into what the thousands of employees are thinking and doing.
Okay. And Lenny?
Mary, becoming nose blind to your routine management reports, if you know what I mean. Things like pass the proverbial smell test. And you can get lulled with particularly good financial results. It's not difficult to get lulled into overlooking things beneath the surface where there are clues in the reports, but nobody pursues them because the bottom line looks good.
Really good point. Lenny, anything to add?
The only other thing I would offer is pace. The pace and scale of change that's before us, while we're balancing the current strategic view and decisioning for the current situation, the pace of change is coming up on us really fast, much more quickly than it has in the past. And so that balance is something I'm concerned about.
Okay. Well, I want to thank all of you for all your contributions today. This was great. We are at the time now that I think we want to break out into our breakout groups. So I'm going to turn it back to Jessica. I see her on screen. And again, thanks for all your contributions to today's discussion. This was great.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
Great, wonderful. That was a terrific panel. I really appreciated all of your comments and your wisdom. And honestly, that last question in particular was terrific. So again, thank you, Mary. Thank you, Tom, Ruth, Lenny, and Dorlisa. We really appreciated your time today. So now we're going to shift, as mentioned, to our breakout sessions. So on the screen, you'll see we're calling out for you to actually open up the other invite that you should have gotten on your calendar to join your breakout session. And each of you has a specific breakout room. There should be a separate Zoom link. So you'll actually want to log out of this and log into your new Zoom room. I know a lot of you may not have selected a breakout session type. So the great thing is actually we have a very special guest, Stephanie Sonnabend, our co-founder and chair of the board, who actually is going to stay on with me and do some Q&A that we submitted previously from the attendees, as well as some live Q&A that we get in the chat. So again, if you want to go ahead and locate that invite now and start your other session, you'll be in there with a corporate director and some of our panelists, actually. Okay, so again, for those of you that are staying here today, we have a very special treat, as I mentioned, with Stephanie Sonnabend. Stephanie is the former CEO and president of Sonesta International Hotels Corporation and a strategic consultant to chairmen, CEOs, and COOs with a special focus on hospitality, real estate, and family businesses. She has also served on a number of public and private boards, including Sonesta Hotels, Century Bank, and SVN, and has chaired and served on numerous board committees, including audit, risk, nominating, and governance. And as I mentioned, very excitingly, she's also the co-founder and chair of 2020 Women on Board. So we're very grateful for her for bringing this tremendous organization to life. Thank you again, Stephanie.
Thank you, Jessica. And I must say that was a fabulous panel.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So Stephanie, I'm going to start off with a couple of questions that came from our audience beforehand, and then we can jump to some live Q&A via chat that I'll moderate. So first and foremost, you have been on this journey with 2020 Women on Board since you started it back in 2010. What has surprised you the most?
I think we never imagined in 2010 how much this resonated with people. We knew we had an idea and people were interested in it, but little did we know that we could build this organization to a national brand, and this year also going global. That it's just been an amazing experience to galvanize so many people who are interested in this cause.
Yeah, it's been great to see the momentum, obviously, too, that all of our states in the Carolinas hit 20%, obviously, over the nation, too. So obviously, a lot of great results from 2020 Women on Boards. So let's talk about this 50-50 goal. Are you optimistic? Why? Why not? What's your thought on how we're going to get there?
Well, we've always been a bold organization. Back when we started, 20% was a bold goal because the numbers in 2010, the percentage of women, no, 2011, the percentage of women on the Russell 3000 was 10.6% and hadn't moved in 10 years. So we were, it was an ambitious goal then. And so we said, okay, let's go bold this time as well. And the difference with 50-50 Women on Boards, it's a mindset difference. That not only will women have a seat at the table, they'll really be an equal partner in the boardroom. Optimistic, again, I think it will take a while for us to get there, but if we can shift the mindset of corporate America, we know we have our work cut out, but I do believe that we will be able to shift that mindset and have women feel like an equal partner in the boardroom.
Absolutely. It's as much of a theme that we want to achieve as a number. So that's terrific. And I'm very excited about the goal too. Mm-hmm. So we received a lot of questions about routes to the boardroom. So in particular, do I need to be in the C-suite? Do I need to be an SVP? What title do I need to have? How should I think about nonprofit service? How soon is too soon? Tell us a little bit more about your journey to the boardroom and what you think is super critical for attendees to think about in terms of kind of the path to the boardroom.
Mm-hmm. So I had the fortunate opportunity to become a C-suite executive, that I became CEO of Sonesta Hotels. But even before that, when I was president, is when I got asked to be on Century Bank, which is a $4 billion commercial bank in the Boston area. And the reason, and I got asked because through a women's networking group in the Boston area, that they had no women on their board at that time. And so they reached out to this women's networking group to look for a board member. And they were looking for people from diverse industries. And so representing the hospitality industry and real estate was something that was very appealing to them, which is why they approached me. But again, it came from my visibility by being involved in an organization called the Boston Club, which was a women's networking. But there are a lot of questions that you threw out there. One of them was also the question of, do you need a C-suite title? And while many boards are looking for that title, what we're really suggesting, and part of our messaging, is that a board of all CEOs is not a diverse board. Even if they're men and women, That's not really a diverse board. What you really also want is people with different skills, different backgrounds. So you may want a CIO or a CFO, certainly someone to chair your audit committee. Or entrepreneur has great experience and may not have even that C-suite title, or someone who runs a very large division and who has P&L responsibility for a multi-million or billion-dollar portion of a larger company. And they would also be great board members, as well as certainly people in human resources, which is increasingly companies are realizing the value of having human resource professionals on their boards. And of course, that's an area where women tend to gravitate towards.
Absolutely. Great point. And I know we saw a question about this in the chat too. So talk to us a little bit about nonprofit service and how you think about that as a stepping stone to corporate boardroom service.
So public boards don't want to necessarily feel like they're the training ground for board members. So they want people who understand how boards operate and who understand what the various committees do and board procedures and those sorts of things. And that's where nonprofits are a great way to get some of that experience, especially the larger ones, which tend to operate more like a for-profit organization. So that's what the other value of nonprofits is, to build your network. That before you join a nonprofit, and make sure it's something that you're passionate about, because you don't want to volunteer your time and potentially volunteer money to, because most nonprofits are looking for their boards to contribute at a high level. So before you do that, make sure that it's an organization that you're really passionate about, and look and see who else is on that board, and is that network going to be valuable to you moving forward? That's what you're looking for it as a stepping stone for a corporate board. Are there people there that, and then those people will get to see you in action. So, and a great way to then reach out to them, if you're already on nonprofit boards, those are great people to network with and say, okay, I'm looking to get on a corporate board. Could we have a conversation about how you suggest I transition to a corporate board?
It's a great point. Yeah, looking at the backgrounds and names of the individuals on the nonprofit boards is a really great suggestion. And actually, I see another terrific question from Candace. So are there committees on nonprofit boards that might be a good way to learn skills for corporate board service?
And the answer to that is yes, especially on the larger ones. So for example, audit is a great committee, especially for people who are not financial experts, that to be able to join the audit committee, I think that's a valuable. Nominating, again, and that's a great way as to be vetting other candidates for that nonprofit, and you get to see people's names and resumes and reach out to them on nominating. So those are, I think, are probably the two most valuable committees, but there's also other committees depending on the organization. I was on the board of a number of higher education boards, and there they had facilities committee, which was again a valuable experience. They had an investment committee, which I was not involved with, but other people were. Again, if you're looking, and of course they all have elements of development, fundraising committees, and especially for private boards, the fact that you're very adept at raising money is of certainly value, and understand the whole process to raise money.
Yeah,
Experience. Less so the event committee, I would say. And again, I know a lot of women tend to like to be on the event committee, and there's nothing wrong with being on that committee, but that's not a committee that would lead to in any way to being necessarily a skill that would be translate onto a corporate board.
That's a great point. And I'll say from my personal experience, I was on a nonprofit board where it was a passion project, but the committee that I led was the marketing committee, which aligns more to my professional skill set. So you kind of have the dual reality there where it's something I care about, but also flexing the professional muscle that I want to exude and bring to a corporate boardroom too. So again, it's great to also think about how it relates to your overall professional skill set.
Great point, Jessica. I actually chaired the marketing committee, which was an ad hoc committee when I was on the board of trustees of New England Conservatory, which is a large classical music university in the Boston area. And same thing, helped chair the marketing committee. And it was a great experience. And sometimes boards have a marketing committee, or another one is a technology committee. Again, if you've got experience in that area, that's a great one also to lend your expertise, both at a nonprofit board and something that a for-profit board would also be looking for.
That's a great point. We got some questions around, how soon is too soon to start seeking out board roles? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It really, there's nothing that's too soon to start preparing to seek out roles. And what I mean by that is looking strategically at your career and seeing whether how you can become an expert in something. So whether that is again, in cybersecurity, as you are a marketing expert, and to be able to become visible and known and begin to develop your network. So all that can be done before, early on in your career. And those same activities that you're using to eventually get on a board were also great activities to help advance your career. And then again, figure out the path to get to ideally to a C title there. But if that's not possible, and if you're a sole entrepreneur, promote yourself to become the CEO of your organization. Don't call yourself principal or even president. Make yourself the CEO of your own business.
I like it. Be your own CEO. That's a great point. And I'll say, I was talking with Dorlisa, who's been a great coach for me during this process. And one thing that she reminded me of is more than when you're applying for a job, you have to be very pointed when you're looking for a boardroom position about your very unique value proposition. So what is the specific thing that you are offering to this specific board? Whereas when you apply for a job, you might say, I'm great at marketing, but I'm also great in general. And here are all the different things I've done. With board service, you want to be really pointed and you want to be really thoughtful about targeting boards and being very explicit about what is the value add. So
Right.
That's just something that she gave me great feedback on.
Yes, and speak in board language too. So to take your experience and turn it into language of qualities that boards need. So global marketing is a one, and with the big word global in there, so that they know that you've done that. Or again, if you're in the insurance area, it's all about risk. So you don't talk about insurance, you talk about you're an expert in risk. Or if you're an attorney, maybe you talk about compliance. So those are some of the words, again, that boards are looking for that will spark some interest in how, and again, it's very important in how you position yourself in very succinct, short sound bites.
Great point.
Well, what we talk about and allow women to practice in our Get On Board workshops.
Yeah, I'd actually love to have you talk through some of the programming in more detail. I've participated in the Get On Board workshops. I know we have Path to the Boardroom coming up. Could you share a little bit more about some of the training and educational content that comes out of 2020 Women on Boards?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and you can talk to the Get on Board workshop, having participated in it. But again, what we really that one is a three afternoon program, usually Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, where small groups of 20 to 25 people. We want to make sure everyone fits on, all virtual. We want to make sure everyone fits on the same Zoom screen, if possible. And we, again, work with each individual on perfecting what we call their high impact soundbite, about how they take their wealth of experience in their career and narrow it down into a 1 to 2 minute soundbite, which, as you can probably attest, is not necessarily an easy task to do. And then we also talked about the value of LinkedIn and creating your board profile and some of the more mechanical aspects that you need to get on a board. And then our newest program, which I'm happy to say I'm one of the creators of, the Path to the Boardroom. And this really came from, again, from a lot of our people who attended the workshops, attended our events like this one, who weren't quite board ready, but felt that they still were interested in getting on a board in 5 to 10 years from now. And so that program is really looking at what the steps they can do now. And the reason they may not be ready is either they haven't advanced in their career or they're just too busy. Maybe they've got a family at home, family obligations at home, or they're just maxed out in their career. So again, but that doesn't mean that they can't start the building blocks. And so we're going to talk a lot about networking. We talk about networking in both programs, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how, again, about getting on nonprofit or association boards, government commissions, those sorts of things. We're going to talk about, again, how to position your career, how to fill in the gaps, if you will. So, for example, every board member needs to have some working knowledge of how to read a P&L. And so if you're in a functional area and don't have that experience, how do you gain that? And those are some of the things that we're going to be discussing to help people. And again, it's going to be small group interactive, probably will be we haven't quite figured out how many sessions, but it will probably be maybe be just one session to start, and then with continuing from there, depending how much whether we can cram everything into 1 2-hour session or that we need more time. People want more information and more time.
Absolutely. Yeah, when I did the Get on Board workshop, it was in person, so I haven't done the virtual version, but I've heard great things. But I think it was very pointed at helping me refine, to your point, my value proposition. And we even got into some of our board bios and how to refine some of the documents you need for board service. And it was very tangible. It was a terrific one-day workshop, really helped me dig in. And I think Path to the Boardroom is going to be even better, because I think it's starting to lay the groundwork, to your point, for individuals that in the long run want to explore board service, but they may not be ready yet. And because as we're seeing, sometimes men are joining boards at younger ages than women, and women aren't getting to this conversation until later in life. And so if we can help women start to think about this earlier, I think it's going to help us build the pipeline. So I'm really excited about it.
And I think there is a trend in boards now that they are realizing that diversity of age is a value too. And so that everyone doesn't need to be 60-plus-year-old white man.
Exactly.
That to have a 40-year-old woman of color would be a very diverse and a great addition to the boardroom as well. So
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I know you mentioned with Path to the Boardroom and the time commitment. So we did get a lot of questions around how should I think about how much time this is going to take joining a board? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I know it's actually hard to get your head around if you're doing this for the first time.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why people may not be quite ready, because a board, meets anywhere from my bank board met once a month, which is, but it was only for a couple of hours once a month. So that was, whereas most commonly boards meet about 4 times a year, all day. And included in those days are committees as well, committee meetings as well, especially if they're flying people in. They tend to put the committees on the day before or the day after. There's oftentimes social functions attached, at least there used to be, back in the days when we were going out to dinner. Some boards have a golf outing attached to their board meeting as well. So it is a day or two at one time, generally 4 times a year. If you're on the audit committee, that also meets between 4 and 5 times a year, either at the same time, around the same time as board meetings, but is more controlled by the quarterly filings. So is for the audit committee. So there's that commitment as well, plus all the commitment of reading the board material. And
Not a small amount.
those 100+ page binders, hopefully not that long. But that generally to really go through it and digest it really takes some time, and more time early on as if it's an industry you're not familiar with, that you have to learn the industry as well. So that takes time as well. And then to cap it off, if there's something special going on, a crisis company,
Of course.
or a merger and acquisition or something else, that there can be a whole number, an active shareholder, there can be a whole number of ad hoc board meetings, either in person or by phone. And
Right.
when you're on a board, they expect you to show up. It's not optional. It's pretty much mandatory, because they have to put in their proxy statement how generally how much you show up. So so it really is critical that
Yes, for sure. Yes, if COVID hits, things might ramp up a little bit. That's what happened to one of my boards, is we met much more often as we were going through the churn of how do we respond to COVID, and talking to the management team. So totally, it can ebb and flow for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
So how much time do you spend on your board?
Again, it's kind of ebbed and flowed, especially this year. But it's comparable to, having a consulting client. I'd say it's how I think about it. I mean, it feels like it's obviously not a full-time job, but it's definitely something that I have to allot, nights and weekends to be able to get done. But I'd also say, if I think about my professional experience, and in particular my last employer, they respected and understood that I was going to gain a lot of learnings that I could then bring to my current role through board service. And so again, I think it was a win-win for both my employer and for me to be able to learn outside the boardroom. And I'll definitely say, to your point, I work in healthcare and was on a industrial distribution company board, and that was in itself, I had to do a lot of prep and research to get ramped up. So I totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we might have one other question. I'm trying to. Okay. We have one other question, so we only have a couple more minutes, but this question is thoughts on a volunteer versus compensated board position.
Well, there's, again, so nonprofit boards are generally not only volunteer, but they're give or get. So they're expecting a contribution. And oftentimes the larger the board, the larger the expectation is. And so that's something very important to discover up front if you've got the financial resources to, or know enough people who have those resources in order to fulfill your obligation. Whereas, and then there are government commissions type of boards, association boards, which don't necessarily expect you to contribute, but they also don't pay. And private boards do generally pay, but not certainly as well as public company boards. And so there you're looking at between 25 and 50,000, $20 to $50,000 for private boards. And then again, the corporate boards, publicly corporate boards can pay anywhere from maybe 25,000 for a small one on up to, certainly 6 figures with stock options or grants or other sorts of things. So it can be very lucrative, which is why a lot of the old men don't want to necessarily give up their board seats.
Yeah, great point. I'll also say, going back to the time commitment piece, when you go through the process of networking to get on a board and you're starting to move through the steps, whether it's a nonprofit, for-profit, et cetera, you'll get the chance to kind of quote unquote interview other members of the board. So ask these questions, ask, what's the way in which the board meets, how much time do you spend, et cetera. I mean, it's good to actually get a sense of, from the other board members, how the board is run and what the expectations are, for sure.
Yeah. And you don't have to ask what the board pays. That's a very tacky question.
Good point.
You don't need to ask it. It's all in the filings. You just go to the proxy statements and it will tell you what the board compensation is. And the other thing that to know is that all board members get paid the same, except if for people, board members who chair committees. And usually there's an added benefit for that. And board compensation comes in many different ways. There's a stipend, there's a per meeting payment per meeting. And as I said, there's also sometimes stock options or stock grants.
Great point. Well, we just have a couple minutes left, so I just have one final question. So if you think back to the start of your journey, because I know a lot of the individuals that might be on the call today are either starting to think about board service or kind of early in their journey, is there any advice you'd give to yourself as you were starting this process many years ago?
Yeah, I would say that I did not, I was again, CEO of Sonesta on the bank board. And it was at that point that I didn't think to really lay the groundwork to get on my next board. And in retrospect, I wish I had. So that by the time I left Sonesta, I would have been on already transitioned to a second board. So that's what I would suggest to people is that, yes, work hard and all the networking to get on your first board. And then when you feel comfortable with that, continue the process to then get on a second board or third. Although I would not recommend, again, it's hard if you're working full time to be on multiple boards just because they take up a good part of your time. So I think for me, that was it, is that I don't think I started soon enough to really try and get on the next board.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of women I've talked to. So it's never too soon in my mind. So again, we have a lot of great resources and educational content with 2020 Women on Boards.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for obviously creating this amazing organization and for helping us all understand some great advice and next steps to pursue our journey.
Well, Jessica, I want to thank you and Jennifer. You put together a fabulous program. You're running a great organization there in the Carolinas. And so I want to commend you for I know there's a lot of work involved. I really want to commend you for putting together a fabulous program, and also for all the sponsors that you were able to obtain and that support all the great work that we all are doing.
Well, thank you. And thank you to all of you who joined us today. We hope you enjoyed this session, and feel free to email us at charlotte@2020wob.com if you have any questions or concerns, or to Stephanie's point, we'd love to have you as a member of our leadership committee. So you'll work with Jennifer, Hunter, and I on this type of programming and beyond next year. So again, thank you so much, and have a great day and a safe holiday, everybody.
Thank you. Great to talk to you.
Thanks.
Mhm.